Elon Musk has built a career on chasing projects most people thought were impossible. With Tesla, he turned a niche sports car into a global shift toward electric vehicles. And with that, he has built factories on 3 continents and is pushing battery storage into homes, cities, and even power grids. This year alone, Tesla has rolled out robotaxis in Austin, delivered a Model Y, a mid-sized electric SUV to a customer with no one behind the wheel, and struck a multi-billion-dollar deal with Samsung to produce its own AI chips. At the same time, Musk's space company has been just as relentless. SpaceX has carried astronauts to the International Space Station, launched its 100th Falcon 9 of the year, expanded Starlink's global coverage, and reused the Super Heavy booster in test flights. The Super Heavy is the first stage of Starship itself, a 70-meter-tall rocket designed to lift more mass into orbit than any machine ever built. Its controlled returns are the foundation of SpaceX's plans for a fully reusable launch system. And now, SpaceX has done something big again. The company has rolled its newest Starship prototype onto the pad in Texas, preparing for the next attempt at flying and landing the largest rocket humanity has ever built. This one came from SpaceX, a company already famous for landing boosters on drone ships and launching more satellites than most nations combined. And yet, even by SpaceX's standards, this is something else entirely. You're watching Project Aerospace, and here we bring you the latest from the aerospace and military world. Subscribe and stay with us, because the story of Starship is only beginning. For most of the space age, rockets were single-use machines. The Saturn V carried men to the moon but left its stages scattered in the ocean. The shuttle promised reusability, yet it demanded months of costly refurbishment after each flight. It wasn't until Falcon 9 began returning to land on pads and drone ships that a truly repeatable launch system seemed possible. That philosophy has now gone further. SpaceX has not only reached its 100th Falcon 9 launch of the year, but it has also carried the U.S. Space Force's X-37B spacecraft into orbit. This secret vehicle is testing laser communications and a quantum inertial navigation system designed to operate without GPS. If you didn't quite catch that, it means the spacecraft can navigate precisely in orbit without relying on satellite signals. The Falcon's first stage returned safely to Cape Canaveral, marking yet another pinpoint landing in a year of consistent launches. SpaceX has been building toward this moment. From routine crew missions to Starlink deployments, every flight has been a step toward lowering the cost and risk of space access. But the X-37B mission and the steady cadence of Falcon flights show that SpaceX is no longer just a launch provider. It is becoming the backbone of both civil and military space operations, and it's steadily pushing Starship closer to operational reality. Starship is unlike anything humanity has ever tried to build. The rocket stands at 120 meters tall when stacked with its Super Heavy booster, and it is the largest, most powerful rocket ever constructed. Compared to the Saturn V rocket that carried Apollo astronauts to the moon, Starship is taller, heavier, and capable of lifting more than twice the payload. The Saturn V rocket stands at about 110 meters. The rocket is designed to be fully reusable, not just the booster, but the upper stage as well. Instead of burning up in the atmosphere or being left in orbit as space debris, Starship is built to return to Earth, land, refuel, and fly again. That is the critical difference between this and every previous launch system. Starship's payload bay is vast enough to carry over 100 metric tons to orbit, making it suitable for everything from launching entire satellite constellations in one flight to carrying cargo for a Mars mission. It is also designed to host human crews, with an interior volume larger than the International Space Station. But perhaps the most ambitious part of the design is how SpaceX plans to land it. Instead of using heavy landing legs, Starship will be caught mid-air by giant steel arms on its launch tower. This is an approach no one has ever attempted at this scale. If it works, it will allow Starship to be turned around for another flight in record time, much like an aircraft. Starship represents SpaceX's attempt to change the economics of spaceflight entirely, making orbital launches as routine and affordable as commercial aviation. And if it succeeds, it will not only open the path to Mars, but change the way nations and industries think about reaching orbit. For all its ambition, Starship's journey has been anything but smooth. Since the first prototypes began rolling out in 2019, test flights have brought dramatic setbacks. Some vehicles rose only briefly before malfunctioning, while others returned to Earth in uncontrolled descents that ended in destruction. These failures, as striking as they were, have become part of SpaceX's method. as each setback is treated not as the end of a project, but as a step toward improvement. The most recent campaigns have carried that same mix of triumph and challenge. In one test, Starship cleared the launch tower with all 33 Raptor engines firing, only to break apart high above the Gulf of Mexico. In another, the Super Heavy booster lost control during descent and was lost to the sea. Each time, SpaceX has returned to the pad with modifications, iterating at a pace few aerospace companies would even attempt. Critics have pointed to these endings as signs of recklessness. They argue that failures risk slowing progress, wasting money, or damaging the credibility of America's space program. But for Musk and his engineers, each hard landing and each explosion leaves behind valuable data. Every setback feeds directly into the next design, and every test shortens the gap between experimental flight and operational reality. Starship, in this sense, is being built through rapid testing, fast failures, and constant updates. The approach is messy and sometimes spectacularly so, but it has already carried SpaceX further than many thought possible. Starship sits at the center of SpaceX's long-term vision, and that vision stretches far beyond low Earth orbit. The company's goal has always been clear: to give humanity a second home beyond Earth. For Musk, Starship is the machine that makes that possible. Practicality, Starship's capabilities could transform the entire launch industry. By carrying over 100 tons to orbit in one trip, it could replace dozens of smaller launches with a single mission. Constellations of satellites that once took years to assemble could be deployed in weeks. Deep space probes could be launched with heavier instruments, more shielding, and faster transit times. Even the International Space Station, the crown jewel of orbital infrastructure, could be eclipsed by stations built from modules carried up in just a handful of flights. Governments are watching closely. NASA has already signed on to use Starship for the Artemis program, intending to land astronauts on the moon with a modified version of the spacecraft. The Pentagon, too, is exploring Starship's potential for rapid cargo delivery anywhere on Earth, and that is a concept that could move supplies or even hardware across continents in under an hour. But the biggest picture of all lies on Mars. Starship was conceived from the beginning as the vehicle that would ferry settlers, supplies, and equipment to the Red Planet. It is a goal that's still years away, but with each launch, each test, and each setback, SpaceX edges closer to turning that dream into reality. For all its promises, Starship is a gamble of unprecedented scale. The rocket is bigger, heavier, and more complex than anything built before, and the cost of getting it right is enormous. Billions of dollars have already been poured into stainless steel, launch towers, and Raptor engines, with no guarantee that the final system will work as intended. SpaceX has shouldered most of the burden itself, betting that Starship will open markets that don't even exist yet. Lunar landings, Mars colonization, orbital stations, and point-to-point Earth transport are still ideas on paper. The danger is that if Starship stumbles, much of that vision collapses with it. There is also the question of competition. China is developing its own heavy-lift rockets to build a lunar base by the 2030s. Blue Origin, backed by Jeff Bezos, is pushing its New Glenn and New Armstrong projects. Across Europe and Russia, governments are watching closely, knowing that if Starship succeeds, they risk being left behind in the next great space race. Even for the United States, the stakes are high. NASA's Artemis program now relies on Starship as a lunar lander, and the Pentagon is exploring it for rapid global transport. If the rocket fails, American ambitions in space could suffer a blow that sets them back years. But the flip side is just as dramatic. If Starship works as intended, it will reshape the entire strategic landscape of space. Nations, industries, and militaries will have to rethink how they launch, move cargo, and explore beyond Earth. The risks are immense, and so are the rewards. The immediate future of Starship is all about proving that the system can work as intended. SpaceX's next test flights aim to demonstrate not just that the rocket can reach orbit, but that both stages can return safely and be reused. The Super Heavy booster will attempt controlled descents to the Gulf of Mexico before eventually being caught by the launch tower arms. Starship itself will need to survive re-entry and land intact, something no prototype has done so far. If those milestones are reached and the next step is operational missions, NASA is watching closely for progress toward the Artemis lunar landing, which requires a specialized version of Starship to dock with Orion and deliver astronauts to the moon's surface. Meanwhile, SpaceX is planning to use Starship for massive Starlink deployments, potentially putting hundreds of satellites into orbit with a single launch. Aside from that, the company is preparing for in-orbit refueling demonstrations, a critical technology for missions to the Moon and Mars. Without refueling, Even a rocket as powerful as Starship would struggle to carry the supplies needed for deep space travel. Success here would mark one of the final hurdles before Starship can move from testing into regular service. Each of these steps comes with its own risks, but SpaceX has shown a willingness to test in public, fail in public, and rebuild quickly. The next year will decide whether Starship remains a bold experiment or begins its transformation into the workhorse of a new space era. Starship is still unproven. It has exploded, toppled, and failed more times than its creators would like to admit. Yet each setback has carried it closer to a future no other rocket has ever dared to aim for. SpaceX is not just testing a machine, it is testing an idea. The idea that access to space can be routine, affordable, and ambitious enough to carry people beyond Earth. If Starship works, it will change far more than the rocket industry. It will alter the balance of power between nations, open new markets in orbit, and finally make serious missions to the Moon and Mars possible. If it fails, it will join the long list of aerospace dreams that reach too far. But if there is one thing history has shown, is that betting against SpaceX has rarely paid off. This story is still being written. The launches ahead will decide whether Starship becomes a footnote in the history of rockets or the first chapter of humanity's story among the stars. You've been watching Project Aerospace, where we bring you the latest from the aerospace and military world. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe and join us for the journey.